In the deepest darkness of the soul, there is a point where the sound of hope falls silent. It is when the world seems to have turned its back that many scream in silence, and some simply give up. But some stories don't end when everything seems over. There are nights when, just as everything is about to fall apart, heaven whispers, and sometimes that whisper has a name. Tonight a man tried to end his own life for the third time, but for the first time, someone heard him. It was dawn. The rain fell lightly, as if the sky were crying too. The city lights in the distance flickered, distant, like promises never fulfilled. In a small apartment on the 8th floor, he sat on the edge of his bed, barefoot. His eyes were red. His breathing was ragged. In his hands, an empty bottle of pills. His body, still frail, fought against unconsciousness, but it was his soul. It was his soul that had already said goodbye. His name was Eric. He was 36 years old, but he seemed to carry a century on his shoulders. His unkempt beard, his sunken eyes, and his constant silence told the story of a man hollowed out inside. He wasn't evil, just tired of trying, tired of waiting, tired of being strong. He had tried to take his own life twice before. The first time at 22, when he lost his brother in a motorcycle accident. The second at 29, after his marriage collapsed, taking with it what little of himself he had left. And now at 36, he no longer saw the point in any mourning. Eric murmured disjointed words somewhere between pain and numbness. If God exists, why is he silent? If there is a purpose, why did life break me? If there is love, why do I only know abandonment? It was at that moment that something changed. There was no bright light, no thunder. It wasn't a miracle like in the movies. It was just presence, a presence that stilled the air. And then he appeared. In the corner of the room by the half-open window stood a man, dark hair down to his shoulders, simple clothes, eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the world, and at the same time, a kind of peace Eric had never seen. Jesus. Eric, between shock and delirium, tried to move, but he couldn't. He was too weak. He could only whisper, "Am I dead?" Jesus approached, knelt before him and said, "Not yet, Eric, but I came for this, to remind you that even where everyone gives up, the Father still insists, because there is life beyond your pain, and there is a way beyond the abyss." Eric closed his eyes and wept, not in despair, but with the beginning of something he hadn't felt in a long time, relief. The room remained silent, but it was no longer a deathly silence. It was the silence before truth. Those moments, fragile as glass, separated the end of existence from the beginning of something new. Eric, still weak in body and shattered in soul, stared at Jesus with eyes mingled with fear and disbelief. It was impossible to logically explain what was happening there, but something inside him recognized that presence, not with his mind, but with his soul, weary of searching. Jesus sat beside the bed as if in no hurry, as if understanding the time of suffering. And then Eric broke the silence. "I screamed for years. No one heard, not even God. Where were you when everything fell?" Jesus said, "Eric, I was there with every unseen tear, every night you survived thinking you couldn't. I was there when you sank, trying to show you that the bottom can also be solid ground for a new beginning." Eric looked away, squeezing his eyes shut. The pain in his chest was more than emotional. It was physical. It was like carrying tons of absence. Eric asked, "But why? Why does this pain never go away? Why does the world hurt so much when people only wanted peace?" Jesus answered, "Because the wounded world hurts without realizing it, and there are countless people living with shattered hearts, wearing masks to hide their feelings. You are not alone in this cry, Eric. You are the echo of millions who have also considered giving up." Jesus paused. The wind outside beat against the windows as if it too could hear. Outside, the world went on, indifferent. Inside, time stood still to listen to a broken man. Eric said, "I just wanted someone to see me, not for my mistakes nor my failures, but for who I am, even without knowing who I am anymore." Jesus said, "I saw you, even before you were born, before any fall, before any failure. You are more than what you lost, more than what you suffered. You are a son, and that no one can erase." Eric looked at Jesus, and for the first time his tears came not from pain, but from the shock of feeling seen, really seen. No judgment, no rush, no pressure. Jesus continued, "You don't need to understand everything now, but you need to know that the emptiness you feel isn't a lack of meaning. It's a thirst for the eternal, and the eternal always whispers in the silence of pain." At that moment, Eric placed his hand on his chest. His heart still ached, but now there was a strange warmth. As if a candle were being lit within his ruin, the darkness hadn't gone away, but now he was no longer alone. The room now seemed to breathe with Eric. The air, once heavy, became lighter, but the pain was still there, like an old friend that never leaves. And behind the pain was something older, more corrosive: guilt. Eric looked at his hands, trembling, worn from hiding his feelings, and with a broken voice, as if bearing himself before his own grave, he said, "I failed. To my brother, to the woman I loved, to everyone who believed in me. My life is a cemetery of broken promises, and no one forgives those who bury so much hope." Jesus remained silent for a few seconds. Then he slowly got up and walked to the window. Outside, lightning split the sky, followed by distant thunder. But Jesus didn't seem frightened. On the contrary, he contemplated the world as if seeing beyond the chaos. Jesus said, "You know, Eric, there's something curious about guilt. It always wants to dress up as justice. It pretends to punish you for good, but in truth it wants to trap you forever in error. But I came to set the captives free, and there is no guilt stronger than the forgiveness I offer." Eric narrowed his eyes. He felt ashamed to be there before the Messiah himself, with so much filth in his soul. And he said, almost in a whisper, "But what if I don't deserve it?" Jesus turned slowly. He walked over to Eric. He knelt down once more, eye to eye, and touched his hand. Jesus said, "No one deserves it, Eric. Not even the purest of men can buy forgiveness, but it is given, because true love doesn't wait to be earned. It offers grace." Jesus then spoke with gentle firmness, as if breaking chains with his words. "You are not your mistake. You are the one for whom I died. It was for this pain that I accepted the cross. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed." At this, Eric recoiled slightly. Tears now came like an avalanche, not of despair, but of something new: deliverance. It was as if that name, Jesus, had ripped out the thorns of years of accumulated destruction, and Eric's name, the one he himself had cursed so many times, now sounded different, almost as if it had been restored. Eric asked, "But what about what I destroyed, and what I can never repair again?" Jesus said, "You can't change yesterday, Eric, but you can live in the now with purpose. And sometimes living truthfully is the most beautiful way to apologize to the past." In that instant, something broke inside Eric, but it wasn't him. It was the cell where he had imprisoned himself for so long. He was still crying, but for the first time, he felt he no longer needed to hide. The room, once a tomb without a headstone, now seemed to breathe along with Eric. There was no magic. The pain still lingered there, like a long shadow at dusk, but now it shared space with something new. Hope. Still fragile, still timid, but present. Eric was hunched over, his elbows resting on his knees, his head in his hands. Silence. Then a sigh. And then the question he'd carried for years, but never dared to say aloud. Why? If everything is so fragile, so fleeting, why continue? Jesus, sitting on the edge of the bed, answered with a firm, tender gaze, because the breath you still have is the seed of something the world needs. You weren't made to be a number, Eric. You are a flame, and even a small flame can illuminate an entire room in darkness. Eric stared at Jesus with teary eyes. He had heard so many empty words throughout his life, but now each word of Christ seemed to find a forgotten place within him. Eric said, "But I have nothing left. There is no strength, no talent, no beauty, only rubble." Jesus said, "It is from rubble that I like to build, because the world applauds what shines, but heaven celebrates what rises again." Jesus stood up. He walked slowly to the window. The early morning wind was now blowing lightly. Eric watched him, feeling a peace he couldn't explain. Jesus said, "Have you ever wondered why, even when wounded, the heart keeps beating? Because it carries an invisible reminder. There is still something to be lived, something only you can do, something only you can be." Eric felt his throat close up. It was as if something inside him he hadn't even known existed was being awakened. A purpose that couldn't be explained logically, but it made his chest burn. Jesus then turned and added, "For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." You were born with a mission, Eric, and even if you've lost your way, the mission still awaits you. Eric struggled to his feet. His legs were shaky, but his spirit lifted. For the first time in a long time, he wanted to live, not just survive. He asked, "What if I fall again? What if I don't make it?" Jesus smiled, that smile that melts the highest walls, and then replied, "Then I'll be there. Because starting over isn't about failing, it's about remembering that you're still worthy of trying." Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten. Dawn was giving way to the dawn of a new day, and Eric, faced with the same world, was no longer the same man. The sky, once as dark as Eric's soul, was beginning to take on hues of gold and violet. Dawn was breaking, and the first sunlight timidly invaded the room, as if asking permission to enter. The shadows slowly retreated, as did the dark voices that had screamed within Eric for so long. He was standing now. His eyes were still swollen with tears, but there was something new in them. Life. Not a full, resolved, or perfect life, but a willing life. Jesus walked to the door but stopped before leaving. He turned once more, looking at Eric with a tenderness that words cannot convey. Jesus said, "You will be afraid again. You will have gray days and silent nights. But now you know, you have never been alone, and you never will be again." Eric took a deep breath. There were no promises that everything would be okay, but now he knew he could walk, even with scars, even with flaws, because love hadn't abandoned him in the valley. Love had found him there. Eric said, "Jesus, before you left, why did you come just now, just tonight, after so long?" Jesus smiled, that smile that contains centuries of patience, compassion, and glory. Jesus said, "Because today, Eric, you finally became silent enough to hear me. I've always been here, in pain, in doubt, in crying out. But today, you allowed yourself to listen. And the truth is, I knocked on your door every night. Today, you opened it." He then walked over to Eric, touched his shoulder and said, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. You are proof of that." Outside, the first song of a bird announced the new day, and Eric, that man who had lost his faith, his direction, and his meaning, now walked to the porch. The sun touched his face. He closed his eyes. He let the warmth wash over him. He still had wounds. He still had doubts. But now he also had an eternal encounter tattooed on his soul. And in that instant, without warning, he whispered something to himself. It wasn't a perfect prayer, not a pretty phrase. It was simply the truth. Thank you for not giving up on me. Jesus was no longer visible, but his presence remained there, in the breeze, in the light, in Eric's very heart. Because when someone is touched by Christ, they are never the same again. How many of us have been on the brink? How many have screamed and thought no one heard? Perhaps you, watching this now, are living your own dark dawn. But if there's anything this story teaches us, it's that not even the deepest darkness can extinguish the light that comes from above. Jesus keeps knocking at the door, and maybe this is your moment to open it. If this story touched your heart, share it in the comments. What's your deepest question? What darkness have you been facing? Tell your story. Let's create a space for listening, welcoming, and hope here in the comments. If you know someone who needs to hear this, send this video. And remember to like and subscribe to the channel, because stories like this aren't just stories. They're open doors for those trapped inside themselves.